Welcome back, Time Crunch fans. I'm your host, Coach Adam Pulford. We're here today to discuss some silly cycling challenges, how to approach them if you feel so inclined of doing them, how to recover from them, what to expect along the way, and what to expect after. If you've been following CTS Coach Jason Siegle on Instagram, you know that he's been taking on some very silly self-imposed challenges. So I wrangled him to talk all about what he's been up to and shed some knowledge and some tips upon anyone who's looking to swing for the fences on these challenges during the holiday season. So Jason, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, so for those who have not been following you on the gram, can you tell us a little bit more of what you've been doing and how it's going, just in short term?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess at the end of the summer, I was sort of feeling aimless and I wasn't liking kind of where I was with everything. And I saw someone in sort of in a different genre of sport have like a challenge, and I thought, how could I
Yeah.
make that cycling? And essentially, the challenge was for using Instagram, make a video every day, and then tie it to the riding. So essentially, I said, for every 100 people that follow me, I'll ride 1 mile, and obviously that kind of had endless scale. And basically, I put the end date saying I'm going to do that from September 1st till the end of the year.
Yeah, and it's a gamble too. For anyone who knows Jason, like if he decides to do something, he's gonna do it. And I've known him for years and years, and he's very adamant about it. So when you put out a goal like that, yeah, you're kind of hoping that it scales a little bit just for something to do, but it doesn't scale too often, and it doesn't, I don't know, blow up into a million. I don't know. Were you worried about that?
I mean, you kind of maybe hope it does because you're like want to see what that would be,
No,
what all that means. I mean, I guess
right?
where I am now, like 111 days into this, I guess I'm feeling fortunate that it didn't get crazy right away because I hadn't been
Yeah,
riding a whole lot and I would have been
yeah.
broken pretty quick, I think. But uh, it's you let your imagination run wild with an idea, right? And you kind of
Right.
want it to be the most wild thing, even if that's not realistic. But yeah, it's
Yep.
fun.
Yeah, yeah, and along those lines, I mean, you've added probably thousands of followers, and you're racking up the miles. And by the way, you're doing this all on a mountain bike, right?
So originally I was probably doing 95% on a mountain bike. As the miles have gone up, it went to like probably 60/40 with that and a gravel bike. And then I've switched my gravel bike over to like a 32 mil slick tire because just some days like to spend the time that it would take on the mountain bike just didn't make any sense. And yeah, now I'm up to 60 miles. So to do that on a mountain bike, I don't think I would get my anything done other than doing that. So
Yeah.
necessity is requiring it to be more sort of a road bike challenge this last little bit.
And so we're gonna talk about these silly self-imposed kind of like arbitrary challenges because some of this stuff what we're talking about is like a challenge on Strava, right? Like you may have a certain mileage or a certain frequency of exercise, or we're listening to this during the Christmas week, and a lot of people in the world of cycling lean into the Festive 500, which is 8-day challenge to get in 500 kilometers of riding between Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. And so I have a lot of athletes who do it. It's super popular. And for time crunched athletes, that can be a lot of riding. Like if you're not used to doing, I don't know, was it 250 miles or something like that a week, 500K? That can be a lot to squeeze in there. It's essentially like a crash training or a crash course in training. So we want to talk about how to handle some of these high volume blocks that are kind of silly. Talk about, is there any logic behind it? What are the benefits, and then how to come out of it? So, Jason, I'll just go to you first on this. Is your challenge? Is it on the silly? maybe I shouldn't have done this sort of thing, or are you like, yeah, I'm glad I did this?
I'd say I'm glad. I'm glad I've done it. Gave me a goal which I was in need of, and I always find with like when I have like one real good thing kind of driving my focus just with
Hmm.
everything gets better. So I feel like just overall that's been good. I also been before it I've been riding a lot less, and one thing this has made me sort of realize how much you take for granted when you are really fit. And
Hmm.
it just, I mean, just being able to like on a whim decide you're going to do something you can do when you're really fit. And when you're not, then, you know, certain opportunities you might have to pass up. So I'm kind of realizing like, hey, it's been worth it for that because my fitness has improved. I, I could ride probably any distance at this point. If I don't know that I want to have to do something crazy tomorrow per se, but um, I
Yes.
probably could just because I've been having to ride a lot at this point.
Right. Your freshness and your readiness may be a little compromised tomorrow, but the fitness gain is totally worth it. I think for my athletes too, though, there's a lot of things to unravel. So for my athletes they always want something on the calendar, another goal, another thing to strive for, because just as you said, if you're focused on something, everything's better. I tell my athletes, if we have structure, if we have something to go after and structure in our life, you're going to be far more successful. How do you get anything done? You give it to a busy person, sort of thing. And
Hmm.
that's where I think our audience, time crunched athletes, busy people with families getting fitness done, this is also part of it. I don't know. Are your athletes kind of the same in that way?
I feel like just humans are that way. I mean, it's funny.
Yeah,
Like
good
if you
point.
have something that's driving you, you streamline everything you're doing. I just I
Yeah.
don't think I've seen anyone that isn't highly driven towards something, seeing that make other aspects of their lives improve or be a lot better than they were prior to that. It's just they seem to go hand in hand.
You know, on this podcast, and I think on our newsletter as well, because we're writing something kind of along these similar lines. So if you haven't checked out our newsletter, go to trainright.com, sign up for it. But we're more calculated. We're more based in science, in logic of kind of progressive overload, build the athlete to become a high performance machine. But taking on challenges like this, they're kind of like, it's just kind of stupid, epic shit, right? Like there's no logic behind this. Is it? I mean, there's no logic behind what you signed up for, right?
I mean, the only logic is to give me a challenge. Otherwise, like as far as
Yeah.
getting fitness benefit, the only fitness benefits coming because I have to ride a lot. Outside of that, it's sort of
Yeah.
like maybe negative to a certain point. Like if I was doing something structured, I could be much further along. But that wasn't really
Right.
the point. Like the point was do something that I actually wanted to try to do, and if you want to do it, you're going to show up, and that matters.
There's a quote from Tim Cusick. It stands out to me. I've had him on the podcast several times. And we were talking about like, hey, if you got 25 hours to ride your bike around in a week, yeah, that'll make you fit. It's probably better ways of doing it, more efficient ways of doing it. But hey, if you want to go for it, if you have that time, cool. And so I think that speaks to also high volume camps, which we've talked about on the podcast today. A concentrated dose of volume in a short amount of time to challenge you and focus that energy. That's going to give you some good, quote, hay in the barn for later, or fitness, in other words. So for anybody listening, maybe we're catching them just before Christmas, or maybe in the middle of their festive 500 or whatever other challenge that they're going for. What would you tell them for kind of tips and tricks to stay fresh, to stay ready, or recover for that next day? What would a time crunched athlete need to know that hasn't been doing 500 kilometers a week to keep on surviving and actually have some fun?
Make sure they're getting the proper calories in during. Basically, it's a food challenge, both during and after.
Yeah,
Just
that's
stay
true.
on top of that. I mean, obviously, it's going to be more than you're used to, so you're going to probably, if not the second day or maybe third, whatever day you're going to start to feel it, it's going to catch up to you a little bit. But like with
Hmm.
like an 8 day challenge, you can get to the end of 8 days, and then you're just going to have to take some time to unwind from, that increase in stress that you did over that little block.
For sure. I mean, energy in equals energy out. From a nutrition standpoint, I mean, I think a lot of people are worried about calories during the holiday season. But if you're riding, hours and hours and hours, you probably don't need to worry as much. But Jason, for the way that you track calories, or what would you recommend people focus on to measure how much energy they should be getting in if they're riding high volume here between Christmas and New Year?
The more you're riding, I guess you probably want to be on the higher end of the carbohydrate intake. I mean, there's a number of caveats I guess you could have, but I mean, just in general, I would say 60 to more grams of carbohydrate an hour would be a good target, particularly if you're riding, 3+ hours every day for, like like if you're doing the Festive 500 or something like that. There's science emerging now that, maybe we can even absorb upwards of 90. Not everybody's going to be good at that right away, but if you're riding more endurance type riding, you're probably more capable of eating a little bit more than if it was a race intensity. And then, I don't know, I just make sure I'm getting protein and all of that in my regular diet. Because if you're riding more, you have less time that you're maybe eating other meals and such.
So 60 grams per hour, that's at least 1.5 chocolate chip cookies, maybe?
Yeah. You could bring. My go-to is I've been getting the gummy bears from Trader Joe's because they're a good calorie per dollar equation.
Yeah. And I'm all joking aside. I like whatever you put in on a high volume week like this. Like, calories are king. Strive for a little bit more carbohydrate, and I don't think we need to overlook it. I would say, I mean, look at, and Jason, you're kind of the wizard of nutrition here at CTS, but I like to look at kilojoule expenditure of what you're doing on the bike, add that to some activity level, and make sure that our total calorie intake is somewhat close enough to that total energy expenditure. Would you agree with that, especially in high volume weeks like this?
Yeah, I mean, old general rules like try to replace at least 25%. That ends up being easier the lower the effort you're doing, harder if you're really pushing for a long time. But I mean, you should at least be doing that. More you're probably going to feel the benefit of. Like, if you do a good job of your eating during, I guess the thing I always say is, like, if I didn't eat well, you just want to lay on the couch all day after. If you eat well, maybe you're like, you could be bothered to do chores or have to go out walking around, whatever. Like, you just have like, that feels like something that's more doable still. Whereas if you do your nutrition poorly, basically you're a couch potato afterwards. That's been my experience.
Yeah, good point. And to kind of shore that up a little bit, I was speaking to like total calorie intake for the day to make sure that you got calorie for the day. But what Jason was talking about was like a per hour basis or on the ride basis. If you're putting in at least 25, probably 30% of whatever you burn on that power meter, looking at kilojoules, that's pretty good. But 40%, maybe 50%, cool. The bottom line here is we're not talking about fasted rides. We're not talking about like, drinking water only and losing weight on silly challenge high volume things like this. You won't last long. You won't probably finish. And if you do finish, you could dig yourself into a way deeper hole than a recovery week could suffice for. So, general rule on that: high volume, put the calories in, don't worry about it, and don't try to lose a ton of weight during this week. So, Jason, on some of this other stuff too, with these high volume camps, riding with people, it's kind of like soaking up the miles, being more social. There's some benefit there too. Are you on your challenge? Are you riding with others, or are you just like grinding this thing out solo?
It's been sparse on that, mostly because I'm making video stuff, and
That's right.
like, there's days where I set up a camera, ride by it. Like, someone's probably not going to want to be bothered to like wait 10 minutes while I film this and then we go again and do it someplace later in the ride. So because of that, I'm less reaching out. Next week, with the amount of miles I'm doing, I might put out a call to anyone that wants to join. So if it's windy, it's a little bit easier because, yeah, sometimes that part gets challenging for sure. At this point, I maybe wish I had more where it was like a group setting, but just the logistics of that and are a little challenging.
Totally. I mean, especially the way that you're doing it too, with 90% of it starting on a mountain bike. Most people that are, doing group rides are not on mountain bikes. But, I'll encourage everybody to probably not do what Jason did if they're doing a high volume, challenge. Get with people, because you get with people, you're more social, you're connecting, you're working on drafting, you're usually soaking up more miles than you realize. You get a couple hours in and you're like, wait, what? Versus solo, which with Jason kind of slogging out his miles, you'd probably looking down and be like, whoa, 3 more hours to go or something like that.
I mean, it's just an interesting thing. I mean, like during the week, obviously most people are kind of having to do their own thing. With the holiday break, it's easier to
Right.
get a group together. So there's always those considerations. Definitely time would have gone a lot faster on numerous days if it was multiple people with me versus just me and my own thoughts. But I signed up for
Right.
that.
Right.
I kind of figured that there'd be a bunch of it that way, and I was all right with that.
It's a kind of along these lines of normal logic going out the door and some of the psychology that goes on with taking on a challenge. I think of kind of the power of habit, the power of developing these habits, and the power of taking on some epic shit. And so there's something to be said for the volume. There's something to be said for riding with people and training camps and whatever. But a lot of that load that you're doing, a lot of the total stress that you're imposing on your body, it can be counterproductive, like we talked about. But taking on that goal, it removes that decision making process, because you already made the goal of checking your Instagram for you, Jason, just determining how many miles you've already made the decision you're going to ride tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
How many is driven by the Instagram followers.
Yep.
If you're trying, and then if you're trying to accumulate 500 kilometers, whatever the thing is, like, you've already made the decision. So it becomes more simple and you just get it done. And so I'm not a psychologist, but there's a lot of power right there for the athlete. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it's been an interesting journey on the psychology part because initially when it was shorter and I had a lot of options
Mm-hmm.
in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like basically any ride I could envision that I wanted to do, whatever, no matter what kind of trail or whatever, likely was going to fit within, a couple of hours on the bike, regardless of which bike. And
Mm-hmm.
that is really pretty fun. You like just, you're like really excited about going and you like haven't gone on that place in a long time. And you're like, it was really enjoyable. Then it got to a point where some of the options were taken away, and the options that I had, I started having to do them quite often, and I found myself I would procrastinate a little bit because I'd done it. It wasn't so long yet that I was like, I got to just get up and do it. But at the same time, I was like, I don't know, I don't really want to ride that route anymore. But then I'd procrastinate a little bit and be like, all right, now I got to go. You just got to go do it. And now I'm
Yeah.
past that again. It's like it's long enough that I just gotta wake up and get out the door and get it done. So I maybe wish it's either stayed at the beginning phase or just jumped past that middle phase. So you just, like you said earlier, you just got to get out there and do it. But it's interesting, the psychology, and that it actually doesn't just stay stable necessarily with my challenge or any challenge you might come up with.
With that psychology piece aside, once I have an athlete that decides to take on a huge challenge like this, or take on, like a huge challenging race, like Swiss Epic, Cape Epic, or something like that, right? It's like, whoa, don't know how this is gonna go, but I'm gonna help and support you, guiding you through this kind of like stupid shit as we go along the way, right? A lot of that is in the way of getting the rest, getting the food, staying hydrated, really a lot of self care through these high volume weeks. And so, along with that, have you changed? I don't know, any hacks, any tips there in the way of like self care that you've either changed for yourself, during these 100 days, or it's kind of like, oh, I used to do this all the time and now I'm doing it again because I'm riding high volume?
Uh, I would say I just got back on a better like pre-bedtime routine, mainly out of
Sweet.
necessity. And then I'm just tired, so it's like you get to a certain point in the day and you're like, I need to go to sleep, like I'm just tired. Um, or when I was doing less, it'd be like a kid with ADHD or something. I just had too much energy, and so I wouldn't always be sleepy when I probably should. Maybe some of that was habits,
Yeah.
but this is kind of refined the habits to be a little more positive. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something you just said about like someone picking like a really big goal. It's interesting when you have something that you're unsure of how, like, you think it's really going to be hard and you're unsure, like how that can drive you to stay focused on the day to day a little bit better. I've seen this many times with athletes when the goal is really lofty, their day to day tends to be more on point than if it's something they think they can do kind of no matter what. And it's kind of an interesting thing. And I think that, if we tie that back to just doing epic things, that's maybe one of the biggest values of doing something epic. I think it does kind of help ground you into like being a little bit afraid of what's coming, and then you dot your I's, cross your T's a little better than when you think you have it in the bag.
I completely agree with that because, the only way to really grow is get outside their comfort zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if all we're doing is 6 to 8 hours a week, every week, super controlled, super dialed, that's great, especially, if you're building fitness and you're focused on work, family, all this kind of stuff. But if you're going to take on these bigger challenges and if you want to grow your fitness, you got to thread the needle sometimes. You got to swing for the fence, even if that means missing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then recalibrate and swing again. And that's where I think like setting goals and going big sometimes it is really exciting. And also it's the process that goes on into accomplishing some of these goals too. Kind of like you said, it's just like the athlete is just more focused. They're more dialed. They have to go to bed. Like it really dials in your overall habits and becomes, man, you can kind of conquer anything once you have those really good habits dialed, including sleep.
And it's funny because I think a lot like athletes in general sometimes don't. I find you either have an athlete that they're a really good dreamer, and their dream goal, like what they think they're capable of, maybe exceeds what they're capable of, and maybe that's because of, who knows, a number of things, life in
Right.
general, their schedule, what have you. Or you have someone that always thinks, I'm not good enough, I won't be able to do that. Sometimes these epic things lead them to a place where they're now a, they're different than they were before, and they're like realize like some of those self-imposed limits or what they were projecting doesn't match. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I think it's interesting how you can grow that way through doing something really hard. And
Yeah.
we're not stuck as who we are. Like, who we are can change, like our bodies can change and be almost unrecognizable to the person we currently are. You don't get there if you just keep doing the same thing every day. That
Exactly.
those changes don't happen from keeping status quo, if you will.
Well, what's the quote? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always have what you always you'll always will have what you always had. Something like that. Man, I should have practiced that one. But that's just it. Like you can keep on doing the same thing over and over again and never grow fitness, never grow FTP, never grow as a human being. But man, you got to risk it sometimes. And that when you have the time, that's what we need to do. All the lofty, dreamy, starry things aside, though, you're tired, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Got some fatigue going on. If somebody who's not used to high volume, because I mean, you've been a hell of a bike racer, you've been riding your bike for quite some time. If a time crunched athlete takes on these big challenges like this, they will get tired as well. And can you speak to if somebody does the Festive 500 or just rides their face off in between Christmas and New Year, or wants to take on like a huge January? Can
Sure.
you speak to a little bit of just like what a recovery block should look like after you do something that's two times or three times what you've been doing lately?
This is where it gets maybe a little tricky. I mean, generally, I'd probably say
Hmm.
at least a couple days off, and then at least a couple days that are like maybe only an hour, super duper easy. And then after that, it sort of depends on how far overreaching you are. Like, so when I have like someone that's like maybe doing Unbound for the first time, and Unbound is 8 or 9 hours longer than the longest ride they've done, it maybe takes a week or two of doing very little to come out of that. Where you take like Keegan Swinson, who just won, and like 3 days later he's doing like a full regular training ride again because his volume is so high, it's almost like that isn't a big deal. So there's a pretty wide
Yeah.
spectrum, but I would say at least a few. It's going to take you at least a half a week to a full week for most people to recover from something that's way bigger than what they've done before, and take that rest initially. Like that's probably the easiest time to take rest because you're tired. I think sometimes then people maybe try to do something hard too soon, so you just got to be careful on that.
100% agree. I mean, I don't think that, I mean, let's just take a bunch of riding, like a bunch of volume riding. Let's not talk about Unbound. Let's not talk about, let's just say a volume block
Sure.
for a low volume athlete. If you keep your good habits up, meaning you go to bed at 10, you get 8 hours of sleep, you stay hydrated, you're eating, you're fueling. Yeah, it really should only take you maybe half week, maybe Monday through Friday, to physically get fully recovered. Add in all of the stuff, all the stressors of, the new year, new workload at work, all the new projects, kids are back to school. Like there's a lot of other factors that go on there. So like go slow, but take the recovery now because you are fatigued. And if you keep on trying to keep these habits of a ton of riding, you're going to get more tired. However, the asterisks there, I would say, if they were like you, Jason, for example, where you weren't riding as frequently, all of a sudden you kind of maybe found the love for riding again. You want to keep that habit going. So take a recovery week, but do like rest, ride short, and then kind of build into a weekend sort of thing where you keep that rhythm very
Yeah, your
similar. So you
weekend your
keep the
weekend is
habits
like a
going.
normal weekend the next week. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like if you're creating momentum right now over the holidays because you got a lot of time, cool. Keep that momentum going, but just like freshen up because you're probably getting yourself more tired
Sure.
than you are.
And really, I think for our athletes, these are a huge opportunity. I feel like the maybe sometimes Thanksgiving break, Christmas break,
Hmm.
maybe not everyone where it's cold, but when you have like a period of a week or something where you don't have work, these are like a huge opportunity for most, especially if you're time crunch, because this is getting you something that's really novel and you're not used to otherwise. And cycling events in general are more towards the longer spectrum of things, and they are super short. So
Hmm.
there's some crossover there, getting you experience towards those things.
I should say, for some of our athletes and myself, because I'm going to have some travel coming up where I'm going to be off the bike, don't get FOMO by listening to us saying swing for the fences and do 30-hour weeks. Like your reality is your reality. And if you can't ride your face off over the holidays, all good. But you can take some of the stuff that we talked about today and create your own challenge in January or create your own training camp, say down in Florida or something like that in February and log some miles. So that concept of creating some weird, big challenge for yourself, some strange thing, talk with your coach, talk with your family, talk with your wife of taking a little vacation where you get to bring your bike since you just spent the holiday eating cookies, hanging on the couch, which I'm probably going to do, and created a different challenge in a different way. Okay, so don't get that FOMO. Uh, Maybe don't be like Jason and do a 100-day challenge, but if you do, totally rad. Um, Jason, I'll kick it over to you. I mean, since you are getting tired and that 100-day challenge is coming to an end, how are you going to recover from this?
At this point, I'm not
Or just going to go ride
100%.
your bike again?
Yeah, I mean, It's meant to end on December 31st, although I feel sort of almost an obligation to do something crazy on January 1, given the whole thing, but I guess it depends how what I do in the final few days leading in. To be honest, I really don't know exactly what things look like when we hit the new year. With this challenge, you kind of become okay with like not being sure exactly what's next. And
Yeah.
the one thing I do know is I'm going to ride, like, it's made me want to ride more and keep the fitness I've had. Like, it's just the realization it's really nice to be like, someone goes, "Hey, I'm going to do this crazy thing. You want to go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm in a place where that sounds fun and not like grinding yourself to a pulp sort of thing, you know?" So I plan on keeping my fitness. I don't know how much like downtime I'm going to really need, if it's more kind of like the person that just needs a couple days and their next weekend is back to normal. I mean, normal isn't going to be riding as many miles every day as I'm currently doing, but yeah, I mean, I'll get back to having a day off. But otherwise,
Yeah.
it's hard to. I mean, I have a camp I have to work in mid-January, so I'll pretty quick after be riding a big week of riding. So a little downtime and then back
Yeah.
at it, I
That's,
guess.
and I think that's my point is, you'll find a new normal, right? And if you're going big like this and taking on challenges, you are likely looking for something on the backside, whatever that can look like. And I think the new normal is this new level of fitness. And to maintain that, it doesn't look like the same thing that you did to build that fitness. You can
Right.
maintain it with lesser volume, taking some rest days, which is super important for, mind, body, spirit, family.
Yeah.
So don't hear me wrong. If you go big, come back to some normal reality. But I'll say this kind of in summary. The cycling challenges that Strava and also that COVID kind of gave us, becoming more and more popular as these additional mini goals throughout a season, even if you're not racing your bike. I mean, it's not, I mean, appropriate. I was going to say completely appropriate. Of course it is. It's your life. It's your goal to do what you want. But these high volume challenges, they have realities that people need to realize as, time crunched athletes. So just make sure you're really resting on the backside of it. Take your rest, have a ton of fun, and also kind of like Jason, just be very open to letting it change as you go, because you probably like learn something or shift along the way that'll make it even like more fun as you do it.
Yeah, just be creative. I mean, you like doesn't have to be something that anyone else has ever thought of. It just needs to inspire you to chase after it, you know, or like, hey, I want to ride from my house to blah 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 spot, and it seems like totally insane, like could be a really fun thing, and that leads you, you know, to coming up with your next idea, right? I mean, really, hopefully,
Exactly.
you're coming up with challenges to inspire you to ride and get more fit through the process of preparing for whatever the challenge is, or by partaking in it.
So, Jason, if anyone wants some inspiration from you or wants to follow you on Instagram and really jack up your miles over the next closing days of your challenge, where can they find you? What's your Instagram
Yeah,
handle?
it's Jason Siegel. Siegle is the spelling on the last name.
Perfect. We'll throw that in the show notes, and you can find that Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever it is, and also trainright.com. Jason, I'll let you get back to your recovery. And to everyone listening, if you take on a cycling challenge during this holiday season, go big, and then rest up.